All righty. Ooh, don't have my l'chaim here.
Neither do I. I'm gonna go get one.
I'm gonna get some l'chaim. I need some water.
I need some too. I'll be right back.
Okay. All righty. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niv'borei.
Amen. Amen.
L'chaim, everybody. L'chaim. And life is that we're here together weekly to learn from Torah's Chaim, the instruction of life, the Torah itself. So I quote from Mark Twain. The Egyptians and the Babylonians and the Persians rose, they filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greeks and the Romans followed and made a vast noise, and they were gone. Other people have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in a twilight now, or have vanished. The Jews saw them all, beat them all. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? This is Mark Twain concerning the Jews in Harper's Magazine, March 1898, just a few years ago.
There was a T-shirt on sold years ago that I saw, and it had a list of all the, Babylonia, Egypt, all these other countries, and then it had Israel. What don't you get?
So, how would you answer the question? How would you answer Mark Twain's question that the rest are mortal, but the Jewish people are immortal? What is their secret?
God's partner.
Oh, okay. Sounds like you're taking a JLI course. Torah. Very good.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to come from a different angle. You're all right, what you said. It's all correct. But of course, there are different perspectives on things that we need to be able to appreciate. We're going to come from maybe a different perspective. All right, let's open up this week's Torah portion. So last week, the Jews crossed the sea. And now, as the old saying goes, last week or the week before, you could take the Jew out of Egypt, but still, can you take the Egypt out of the Jew? That was the problem, because the Egyptians came after them. They were frightened. But finally, that was taken away. That problem was solved with the splitting of the sea. And therefore, finally, the Jew is out of a bad place. Slavery in Egypt. And even slave mentality still as the Egyptians come after them. But being out of a bad place doesn't mean that you're in a good space. What gets you to a good space? Well, this week's Torah portion begins with that idea. In Parsha Yisro. Let us go straight into it. We'll share the screen over here. See it in front of you? Text number 1 from this week's Parsha. And they journeyed from Rephidim, and they arrived at the desert of Sinai.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I don't see it. The screen seems to have several different frames in it.
Oh, I'm seeing, yeah. Oh, that's weird. Okay, I don't know what to say. Yeah, it's making more and more frames. And if I stop sharing, what will happen?
You just have to close out all the screen. You have other screens open.
No, it's making one of the same screen one into the other. I'm seeing over here. That's really unusual. Let's try now if it will do the same thing. Okay,
Now we see it. Yes.
okay. Let's hope it doesn't. Like, it did it automatically, and okay. Let me not say anything. So they journeyed from Rephidim and they arrived at the desert of Sinai. And it says they encamped there in the desert. And they encamped in the desert. And then the verse says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Ahar. And Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. Now, I have to go to the Hebrew over here so you can appreciate what's going on. So without the Hebrew, it's a little difficult. I want to make this larger, but I don't see how to do it larger on my side. At this point, oh, 1 second. That's a bit too large. Okay. So in Hebrew, if you can follow in the Hebrew over here, Vayichan means, and he camped, which is in singular form. Till now, everything is in plural form. And Vayichan means, and he camped there, Israel, against the mountain. So, of course, this is problematic, and Rashi picks up on it. And he says there, and Israel encamped there. The verse uses a singular form, denoting that they encamped there, as he says, as one man with one heart. By contrast, all the other encampments were divided with complaints and with strife. As we know, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? So there was strife in other places. So when we first read this Rashi, we're very inspired. It's very beautiful. But what does it mean exactly? As one person, as one heart. After all, no 2 people are alike. As the Talmud says, no 2 faces alike. No two minds are alike. We all perceive life differently. We all are different. And if that's the case with the unique character and the emotional makeup that we have, what does it mean that we're as one person, being monolithic? Why would it be a bad thing that we would be all unique? Right? All unique. And everybody accept the uniqueness of every individual. And that, therefore, in our preparation for the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, each one of us has a unique path in how we connect to God through Torah. Wouldn't the individualized approach be preferred? Right? And as the point that we just made, also it's brought in the Talmud, saying the sages taught, one who sees multitudes of Israel recites the blessing, blessed are you, God, who knows all secrets. Why is this? Because God sees a whole nation whose minds are unlike each other and whose faces are unlike each other. And again, the Talmud brings out, the sages taught that the fact that Adam, the first man, was created alone serves to declare the greatness in the supreme King of Kings, only one blessed be he. For a person stamps several coins with one seal, and they are all similar to each other, right? So you have a stamp that you make a coin, and all the coins are the same. But the Holy One, blessed be he stamps all people with the seal of Adam, the first man, and not one of them is similar to another. As it is stated, it is changed like clay under the seal, and they stand as a garment. So what we see is that everybody has got a unique, just like God is one and unique. So likewise, every human is one and unique, as opposed to animals, trees, vegetation. They are all not stamped with a uniqueness. but the human is. And if that's the case, wouldn't the uniqueness of every individual be something worthy to accent? And as the Rebbe in this week's Sikha asks the question is, every Jew underwent an internal process to prepare themselves to receive the Torah. Naturally, each person underwent this process according to their individual nature, unique from anyone else. Accordingly, shouldn't the verse have stated that they encamped at the foot of the mountain in the plural form? Right? In other words, accenting their uniqueness, their specialness of every individual? Is that question clear? Another question that to ask on Rashi, that this is not the first time that such an expression of unity has been said by Rashi. This idea is one heart. Previously, when Pharaoh in last week's Torah portion, when he chased the Jews, the verse states, Pharaoh drew near, and the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were advancing after them, and they were very frightened. And the children of Israel cried out to God. Rashi comments on this. And what does he say? He says that on the words, the Egyptians were advancing after them. He says the Hebrew word noseya, traveling, is written in the singular to teach us the Egyptians chased the Jews with one heart, like one person. So this idea already exists previously. However, there's a nuance. There's a subtle difference. And that is that Rashi switches. When it comes to Pharaoh, they are with one heart as one person. When it comes to Jewish people, they are one person with one heart. So what is the distinction? So let's answer the second question first. Right? So the Egyptians had a common cause, and that came first. The common cause was, of course, to enslave the Jews. So they had a shared feeling, and because of that, that made them into one people. The other way, the Jewish people, is unique. What comes first is one person reality, and only after that, a shared heart, which actually is somewhat counterintuitive, right? In other words, the exact opposite at Sinai happens. We don't have a common cause that brings us together, right? So what brings us together? Simply, we're one person. We're all part of the Jewish people. In other words, we have a shared origin in one people, and we have a shared destiny as one people. And as a result of that, then our minds and hearts can come together as one. Which this is, when you think about it, it's a little counterintuitive. Unless, you've been learning Tanya for a while, then it's, very much intuitive, right? It's very much intuitive. But putting aside Tanya and Hasidic teachings, the Rebbe's teachings, when you think about it, it is somewhat counterintuitive. So in this week's Sikha, the Rebbe says, bringing out this idea, this is the difference between the one heart as one people of the Egyptians and as one people with one heart of the Jews. For the Egyptians, the fact that they came together as one person is a symptom of their shared heart in the cause of chasing after the Jews. But as the Egyptian people, they were not as one at all. By contrast, in our Parsha, when speaking about the Jewish people, the unity of like one person is a result of the very fact that Jews are one person. Well, what does that mean exactly? Now, what does that mean? The Egyptians naturally exist apart from each other as opposed to the Jews. So let's look at text number 6 and we'll see a succinct way to express this. The Sukkot Rav. With regard to the Egyptians, Rashi writes, with one heart as one person. Whereas with regard to the Jewish people, Rashi phrases it the opposite way, with one person, with one heart. Why? Because the Jewish people are inherently one people at their source. The only thing missing for them is to actualize that in their hearts and desires. They're also one, right? By contrast, nations of the world are inherently fragmented, and it's only a mutual goal or desire to achieve something that can bring them together as one. Okay, let's explain this a little more. Let's take this apart and appreciate this a little more. The universe is fragmented. It's divided. What does that mean? It's fragmented, it's divided. I don't mean that there's just a bunch of things, different things. There is no single theory or an absolute truth that unifies everything in existence from a scientific point of view. To put in the language of theoretical physics, if you look at the world and you see what's happening, you want to know how it's happening and why is it happening, right? To explain the nature of something so we can rationally have an understanding. And if we have a rational understanding, then we can predict what can happen time and time again. For example, we all know that there's a law of gravity that pulls things downwards, right? We all know that. Knew that from day one, because, you know, if you're holding something and you let go, it's going to fall. And as much as people experimented and tried to make it not fall, it fell, right? Unless it was propelled, but then eventually it would fall. It wasn't until Sir Isaac Newton's law of gravity that you have an understanding of why and how this is happening, right? And because he had a mathematical formula, he didn't teach us the fact of gravity. He just explained how it works. And because he knows how it works, you can predict how the force works and, you know, what could happen under any circumstance based on the weight, the volume of something, and, you know, what might happen, right? But does this law of gravity explain everything of the universe? Is it the theory of everything? No, not at all. It explains some things, but doesn't explain everything, right? So you have his law explaining something, you have other things that explain other things. And with this, we can understand how sometimes a scientist could be frustrated. And one of those frustrated scientists was a Jewish one by the name of Albert Einstein, who said, I want to know how God created this world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomena, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are just details. What does it mean that he wants to know God's thoughts? Because he wants to understand the why, right? Not the what. The what scientists can figure out. Why? That they don't know. So in God's mind, if you can know that, so why does we know that the what of gravity, but why does it exist? Why is the sky blue? The fact that it is blue, right? So that's what modern physics is trying to do, is to try to understand, as Einstein called it, God's thoughts, because through that, maybe we can come to some kind of theory the theory of everything, as it's called, right? But right now, there are different theories, and each one explains a certain segment of creation, a certain aspect of creation. But it's not the theory of everything. And as a result, what happens? The world is fragmented and divided, right? And there isn't an understanding of that theory, or call it the God particle, if you will. But what it means is the world is inherently divided and fragmented. And this is actually what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. Chapter 33 of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says, the physical universe is the lowest of all creation, about which is stated God's creations. In the plural form, for the physical world is full of negative forces that are called public domain and mountains of division. That's the nature of this world. And therefore, physicists, who are trying to get to the answer of everything, the theory of everything, the God particle, the string theory that will tie everything together, right, are having a challenge, a difficulty. So but one beautiful thing, as we see, as we get closer to Mashiach, as this is what the pure physicist wants to do, is to find that unifying force, that oneness. So, from a Jewish perspective, of course, well, the answer is if you're going to look at the physical universe, you're always going to see a duality. You're going to see light, dark. You're going to see up, down, right, left. Everything has a duality. And therefore, to find the theory of everything is going to be difficult. Unless you come from a Torah perspective. And of course, from a Torah perspective, the theory of everything is God himself, right? As Chassidus explains, the true achdus, the true unity, can only come from God, because God is a simplistic whole oneness. He's not fragmented. Even ourselves, when we speak about ourselves as human beings, we're fragmented, right? We have different character qualities that are, sometimes we feel up, sometimes we feel down, sometimes we feel like, giving, and sometimes we feel like, creating boundaries. And quite often we feel and sense the fragmentation in all of that. We're pulled in so many directions, and sometimes it's just so difficult. Day-to-day living, because of all the responsibilities, all the things that we need to accomplish and do. And how do we do that all? Because we sense the inherent fragmentation of the created being. However, that's from the human perspective. But connecting to God and to his holiness, there's an inherent part. This is inherently in a true unity. Everything else, by definition, can't be unified. It is a duality. It is divisive. It is fragmented. And this is what we're learning actually in Tanya now in these chapters. And through mitzvah allows us to have that unity and oneness with Hashem. As the Tzemach Tzedek writes, understanding the idea of God's unity and what exactly the Zohar and the other books mean when they speak of such matters is very deep. And there are many different ways of understanding it, each person according to their understanding. But first, let's explain the concept on the most basic level in halacha. The Zohar references this basic understanding, as does Maimonides, and it goes like this. There's already another mitzvah to believe in God, which includes the belief that God is completely without form. But this mitzvah of unity adds to that, enjoining us to believe that there is no other God and nothing in creation has an agency aside from God. Everything exists and functions as a product of God's will and instruction, which is credited to the fact that God energizes and animates it. It turns out that there's nothing else other than God. So, if everything is inherently the theory of everything, right? T-O-E, right? Theory of everything is godly, is the godliness in everything, then what does it mean that the world is fragmented? What's the answer to that? If everything is inherently holy and godly and united in one with God, then how is it that we speak about a fragmented world? How does that happen?
Free will,
Hmm?
free will and our animalistic soul.
Okay, good, excellent. And how did that work? How did that happen? How does that happen?
Well, God gives us everything.
Right? But what's the explanation? One word, in one word that we learn.
Partner.
No. Tzimtzum, contraction.
Oh, right.
God contracts upon himself in a manner that he makes room that from our perspective, we feel that we are separate from him. And because we feel we're separate from him, therefore there's fragmentation right there. That's the beginning of fragmentation, is that God creates me, a soul and a body, in a manner that the body and the animal soul, like you said, Andrew, right, through tzimtzum, through the contraction of the infinite light of God, that we feel our selfhood, we feel separate. And therefore we have the freedom of choice now to choose, right, to choose as a result. So that's what happens. And as a result, the world, from our perspective, is fragmented. But there's another way we could look at the world. And how's that? Not from our perspective, from God's perspective, that it's not fragmented. That's actually one. There is a oneness and a unity of God. So from the same God comes two things. How's that? To explain Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum was the process, but let's understand it further. We've had this idea before, right? When you see somebody chasing a bus, ask them, and they miss the bus, ask them. That's beautiful, wonderful hobby you have, running after buses. When did you take that up? The guy's going to look at you a little awkward, that you're a little odd, because he'll tell you, I don't like to run after buses. I want to get on the bus. I missed it. Oh, so your hobby is to get onto buses. No, I'm not interested in getting onto buses. I just want to get to work. So that's what you're into. You're into getting into work. Says, frankly, no, I just need to work so I could get a paycheck at the end of the week. So that's what you're into money. I knew it. You're just a regular Western capitalist, You're just like everybody else. So actually, no, not even interested in the money. I just need the money so I could put food on the table for my family. That's what I care about, is my family. What is that? We have what's called an inner will and an outer will. The inner will is what you really want. What you really want is to take care of your family. That produces an outer will that you run after a bus, to get on the bus, to get to work, to make money, right? Those are all means to an end. To take care of your family is an end in itself, because that's what you do it for. So likewise, God has that, the inner will of God and the outer will of God. The inner will of God is that we're bound up in one with Him. And there's no other reality but being bound up with Him through a mitzvah. But then He produces an outer will that is a means to an end, that it's not as an end in itself. And what's that? With that, He creates a world that is fragmented, that there's, a sense of being separate from Him. And He does that, as we explained, through Tzimtzum, contracting upon His light, that He conceals Himself in such a manner that gives us freedom of choice, so we can either continue and live in a fragmented world, or we can touch His inner will, His true being. What He really wants is that we should connect with Him, partnership, like you said, Andrew, right, through doing a mitzvah. In other words, touching Him rather than what He just does. It's like in human relations. Most of the times we relate to people for what they do, not who they are. That's the way we relate to people, right? Oh, you said a funny joke, you make me feel good. You did something, and I relate to you through that, and therefore, I feel closer to you. But not for who you are. That's already a deeper thing, a much more profound thing. And this is how God relates to us, for not what we do, but for who we are. And that's the difference between the Egyptian idea, right? They related to each other, not for who they are, but for what they do. What did they do? Oh, they hate the Israelites. They want to enslave the Israelites. That's what they do, right? And therefore, let's get together and go after them, right? As the anti-Semite, what brings them together? Only because of a common goal of the hatred of the Jew. So they're brought together with that common goal. So it's with one heart, right? With the common goal, that what makes them one person. But the Jewish people are exceptional. Is what brings them together is an attachment to the inner will, not to the earthly human condition. Because the human condition is the only way two people can come together is if they have a commonality of something that they do together, whatever that doing might mean, right? It might mean that you both love skiing, or you both love opera, right? And that brings you together. You both like, things that bring you together. But the Jewish people and Torah are exceptions. They're directly from God and a product of His true oneness. Let's go back, sharing the screen. God created the world for the sake of Torah, which He calls the beginning of His way, for the sake of Israel, which He calls the first of His grain. The Jewish people, it's first, as one people. Simple Jewishness and connection to God brings out inevitably how we will have one heart together. So this answers our original question. How did the Jews experience one heart? because we start off with an inherent bond with each other through that inherent bond that we have with Hashem, which touches his inner will, what he really wants. That transcends the nature of this world. Let's look this week's Sikha from the Rebbe. The idea of unity in this world is connected with the manifestation of one unified God who transcends this world. That's God's unity. That's God's unity manifest in the world is credited to two things. In reality, transcend this world, the Torah and the Jewish people for whom the world was created. The unity of the Jewish people came about as a direct result of the very nature of the Jew, from the essence of their Jewish soul that transcends reason, where differences occur. This is able to influence and affect that the Jewish people camped there as one person. And then the very fact that they stood as one people due to an interconnected part of their soul, thereafter awakened the desire and the passion to receive the Torah with one heart. However, with non-Jews, the type of intrinsic unity is impossible. The one person. Rather, it is only by the symptom of a shared hatred, in the case of the Egyptians, as one heart. But for the Jew, whose core Jewish soul is their true identity, true unity is possible as one person. The Rebbe expounds upon this by a poem for bringing as follows. How is it possible to unite Jews to prevent discord, distance, and of course to prevent any animosity and fights? All the solutions pursued thus far are all the plans, the parties, the big ideas, none of them are able to dissolve the differences that exist between cultures, countries, and people. The only thing that can unite the Jewish people, regardless of time and space, is opposite the mountain, namely, the feeling that we're standing at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. At that point, the walls come down. All disagreement and litigation dissolve, and we become as one. The reason for this is that the unity only flows from something that extends from a unity of God himself. God invested himself in the Holy Torah and its mitzvahs, thereby investing himself into the Jewish nation. This is what the Jew lives with. So in other words, we can't do this. Humanly, the only way we can connect on a human level is the human neediness that we have. So the Egyptians had a neediness, right, to bring their slaves back. They had a neediness to enslave the Jewish people. So that neediness that they had united them in a common bond, and they stood together. Take away that neediness, they're no longer united with each other. But the Jewish people, what brings us as one is that we stand before the mountain, meaning we stand before God, that we are a recipient. We are the receivers of his Torah, which is one with him, and we're one with him. And therefore, because of that oneness that we have, that transcends the duality of this world, that transcends fragmentation of the human condition, because of that, we are inherently bound up with each other as one. That unity can never be broken. We'll be there through all challenges. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have a Yisro and that we don't, do things to ruin that inherent bond that we have. But the fact is, we do have it. And the fact is, the reason why we're here today is because of that inherent bond that we have with God in such a manner. So other nations, they are a lot more powerful than we are when it comes to their military. There are a lot more, perhaps, world achievements that they have achieved, even though maybe that we could say that Nobel Prizes, we have, over 30% of them. So maybe we've achieved more in that respect even. But let us say, that they have great noble genius of achievement. which is wonderful. And even when Jews have that achievement, it's wonderful, but that's not our true wonderment, because those achievements come and go. Those achievements of nations come and go, but the Jewish people survive. And the secret for their survival is because the Jewish people are bound up with the oneness of God that cannot be torn apart from, inherently, intrinsically attached in God that way, that makes us, we're attached to each other inherently and intrinsically. That doesn't make sense. We understand that because we feel that. So for example, when something happens, a bomb goes off in Israel and a bomb goes off in India, we feel bad for any loss of life anywhere, because after all, it's God's imprint on a human being. And if innocent life or even non-innocent life is lost, it's a tragedy. But when it happens in Israel, we don't just think of it as a tragedy. We skip a heartbeat. Somehow it touches us. And you might say it's because, well, we have a common culture, common language. Not the case. How many Jews speak Ivrit, Hebrew? How many Jews, have the common culture, Israeli culture, that they, have a part of their lives? Who's doing Israeli folk dancing? Who's singing Israeli songs? And yet we have a bond. The bond is one of the soul, not one of a culture that brings us together, not one of a race that even brings us together. It's a soul connection. And because of that, we are as one person with one heart, no matter where that bond will always be. This idea of Jewish unity especially is important this year, the year of Hakel. Hakel is the year of Jewish gathering. As we've spoken before, it's a time that in the Holy Temple, when we had it, and God willing, we'll have it speedily very soon. So on the end of the first day of Sukkot, the king would gather all of the Jewish people, men, women, and children. The only time that it was an obligation for men, women, and children to gather together. Never in the cycle of Jewish life is there an obligation of men, women, and children gathering together, except for Hakel. Even when it comes to holidays, there's not an obligation for men, women, and children. Men have an obligation, women somewhat, children for sure not. But the entire nation having an obligation, so once every 7 years, Hakel year after the sabbatical year, is the obligation to gather and to be united, hear words of Torah from the king that inspires and brings us closer to Hashem, and to recognize that the unique bond that we have with each other as a result, as one person with one heart. So we need to gather people together. This is the year of gathering. So we do it here on Zoom, which is wonderful. We need to do it also in person. So God willing, I'm going to be coming to New York for Shabbaton in May. Pesach Shem, middle of May. So New Jersey's close by. Germany's close by. So is Peru. Peru. New Jersey for sure. Michigan's not so far. L'chaim and all the other L'chaim. So that is this week. No stronger power in this world than the Jewish people. And this part of the problem that we experience today as a Jewish people is that we feel meek, we feel weak. Because the nations and the people around us, many of them, there's a lot of spewing of hatred. And when you hear it over and over, it can get to your psyche. And it can play with you in your mind and in your heart. And we're affected by it. But if we knew who we are individually and collectively as a people, and know that there's no greater force in this world, because we are the embodiment of that oneness of God, which our duty then is to bring that oneness of God to the entire world, to all nations of the world, that they should recognize and become aware and be part of marching towards Mashiach. But, what's the proof that we're weak and meek? How many people are comfortable with the G word, God? How many people think twice before saying, thank God? How many people think twice to express to maybe people that are, you don't know where they're holding exactly, and whether they believe, don't believe, and we think twice about saying, oh, this is a real blessing from God. I just was in the hospital and visiting the chazan of the shul here for many years, and Hashem should give him a refuah shleima. Need to find that miracle pill. So his wife, I was blown away. She was, he's forgetting, right? That disease, and so sweetly trying to, help him, remind him, coax him maybe that he should remember, so so she was telling me about her coming out of Russia. She didn't know anything about a Rebbe, Jewish life, but knowing that she's a Jew, and there's something special about it. She became observant, but knowing that there's something special about just being a Jew, and that, in the end, we are a light unto the nations, which is exactly, in my life, same thing as, not being raised in an observant home, but knowing there's something special of being a Jew. And furthermore, being in Russia, the G word was, what they wanted to eradicate. That's a godless state. And not only that she knew that she was Jewish, but, strongly believing in God. Again, not raised in a religious home, but that it's very much a part of her life. And to be able to express it openly, our allegiance and belief that everything is from God. So she says that it's not easy dealing in such a situation, but it's all a blessing. It's all from Hashem, and therefore it's all good. How many people are comfortable to say that? We like to be the victim, to kvetch, and instead of having an opportunity of seeing the unifying theory of everything, that unifying the theory of everything is the unification of oneness of God. And even in the most troubling and difficult circumstance, this is from Hashem, and therefore all smiles and dealing in such a pleasant way and in such a really difficult situation, being so pleasant with her husband and not frustrated. How come? Because it's unifying theory. And that's what the Jewish people embody. And that's a message we need to bring to the world. Achai. Achai. Any questions? So with that, we have the answer to Mark Twain, what makes us the eternal people. So it's true because of a relationship that we have with Hashem, that we're partners. Absolutely. But that partnership comes out of, out of a reality of the unifying theory, the oneness that we have in Hashem, in a way that brings us united and one with each other. And then that is our eternal strength, and that no other nation has access to. They don't have access to it. It's not possible because the human condition doesn't allow it. Andrew, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, besides, anytime somebody is Jewish does something not good, like Madoff or something, it's almost like a unanimous, he's Jewish, and the way that you feel it. I mean, I remember it growing up. I was in the 5th grade when we had the '67 war, and they were trying to explain it to us in Hebrew school, but I didn't need an explanation. I felt it.
Right. That's the neshama. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. Right. It's beyond explanation in the end. Explanation is, if you need an explanation, that means I need to arouse my heart in a commonality of cause. I don't need to arouse my heart in a commonality of cause to be connected, right? Being that the neshama soul is connected in such a way, right? So therefore we are one person. Because of that, my heart is there. My heart is totally there. Exactly. And that's what I felt. And it doesn't make sense. Right? It's not natural, it's not human. It's godly. It's not the human condition. That's why every nation comes and goes. Because the common ground that they share will melt away at some point, because the common ground that they're sharing is not eternal message. It's not the theory of everything. So it's a theory of something. So for some time, it'll hold you together. And then afterwards, it's going to fall apart. But without being open about the G word, God, who's the theory of everything, and the Jewish soul that is bound up with God in that manner that it is bound up in a perfect unity, right? And that's therefore what unites us with each other as one person, and therefore we can come together in one heart. If we don't speak that, then we're doing a disservice not only to ourselves, but to all of humanity. Because that's what it means, a light unto the nation. Light unto the nations doesn't mean that we win Nobel Prizes. No. Let all the non-Jews win all the Nobel Prizes. Let them all win it. The only value in winning the Nobel Prizes is that they maybe will give some respect, but the respect is in the wrong place. The respect is not for our human genius, but it's for the message of God that we embody, and therefore, and we have a responsibility to carry for the entire world. We have that responsibility. You know, which ties in with Yud Shvat, the 10th of Shvat, the Rebbe becoming Rebbe, right? And what it means, a Rebbe is a person who feels the responsibility for every single Jew, and by consequence, every single human being. It does not exist such a person in the world besides a Rebbe. Even righteous people are not that. Righteous people means they're righteous for themselves, doesn't mean that they take full responsibility for everything. How could a Rebbe take responsibility for everything? With that, you know, that's how, and the Rebbe answers questions of life and death, and will contradict a lawyer, not a lawyer, sorry, a doctor, lawyer too maybe, but a doctor, contradict a doctor who has got seemingly intimate knowledge. You know what the difference is? The doctor doesn't take full responsibility for that person's life, but the Rebbe does. And therefore he can answer the way he answers. There isn't, and in the end, every Jew is that way, except the Rebbe is just totally, you know, full throttle, right? But we have a piece of that in us. And every Jew has a responsibility for the entire world.
They had it up like
Hi.
they have to often.
Hmm?
As the Rabbi said, it's like an army. There's a plan. The Torah is the plan of Hashem. Everyone has to do his application of this plan.
Yeah. All right, folks, we got TRC coming up.
When in
Minutes. All right. Okay, dry bones. Happy Tu B'Shvat. It's Tu B'Shvat tonight. Tu B'Shvat Chag HaIlanot. It is the Rosh Hashanah of the trees. So tomorrow you could go hug a tree, especially if you live in Canada. That would be some experience. Actually, the custom is to have fruits that Israel is honored with or specified about it. So dates, figs, grapes, pomegranates, dates, figs, pomegranates. Did I miss something? So that's a custom. Olives. Thank you, Art. Oh, Art's in the country, so he's got the olives there taken care of. Yes, olives. So the custom is to have from those fruits, make a bracha. If it's the first time having those fruits in the season, probably not, but if it is a first fruit, so you make a shechianu. And we should all have strong roots. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shavua Tov, a good week to everybody. And
Shabbat Tov.
forward.
but
This week, the 10 Commandments in synagogue. So make sure you're in synagogue, local Chabad synagogue, so you can learn the commandments.
local could be a problem.
All right, folks. All the best. Be well. Daniel, thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Our first timer.
Absolutely.
God
Yes.
bless. Be well.
That's,
Welcome aboard.